Hello, everyone. Very nice to have many of you already joined. Today's webinar from Appraisd and 3C on performance management, how to balance soft skills with software. I'm Amira Kohler. I'm the Director of Performance and Change at Appraisd, and I will in a moment hand over to both Roly and Hedda to do a quick introduction to themselves. But it's really great to be with you today, talking about what we hope will be a really interesting conversation about the need to balance the people side with the system side when it comes to performance management. At Appraisd, we're a performance management software provider, and we're really passionate about making sure our software is easy and valuable to use. But we know that the system can only go so far. It's what people do with it that really matters. So we thought it'd be really interesting today to be joined by Hedda, who is a complete expert on the subject of the people side of performance management. Hedda, do you want to just give us a quick introduction to yourself and 3C?
Hello, everybody, and thanks, Amira. Yes, I'm Hedda Bird. I run an organisation called 3C Performance Management Specialists, which sort of does what it says on the tin. By background, I'm actually a mathematician by training. I worked in the theatre quite a long time ago, and I have an MBA from Warwick. So I've got quite a mix of experience, which I brought to developing performance management, and it's been a very interesting journey, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you very much. And Roly, the founder and CEO of Appraisd. Should I just say a word or two?
That's right. I would. Yes, I am. And I set up Appraisd about 11 years ago, I think, to try and create a performance management process that was really focused on the relationship between managers and employees, and the idea that it should all be about that relationship and ensuring that the strength of that relationship is reinforced and improved through our system. So yeah, I'm also an engineer by background. Well, that was my degree. So Hedda, you and I probably have perhaps some science in common, but Appraisd is a very customizable system, and we believe that it needs to be something that each organization feels is absolutely right for them. We're the opposite of just taking something off the shelf and putting it in place and thinking that's going to solve all your problems. But no, Appraisd is a very kind of configurable tool, and it works in very different ways for different organizations, and that's what we have found is what works to strengthen those manager and employee relationships. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit more about it as we go through.
Great, thank you very much. We're going to try and keep this quite pacey and lively, and I'll be facilitating Hedda and Roly and probably interrupting every now and again throughout. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we'll probably cover a whole load of different subjects, and it's quite unscripted. It's very fluid. So don't shoot me if we don't cover all of these. But the things that we think we'll probably cover are, what are the catalysts for software? So what leads companies to think that they might need a performance management software solution? What are the drivers? So what factors drive the kind of decision making behind the choice of software? Because you'll all be aware there is a whole panoply of potential software solutions out there, of which Appraisd is clearly the best, but not the only one. Balance, how to balance the need to train managers and employees versus the need to train them and on implementing the software. So how to get the right balance. Issues to do with confidentiality. So I think some really there's some of the more hairy sides of this is how to encourage people to use software when they may be a bit nervous about stuff going on a system that will stay there. So we'll have a good chat about that. Senior advocacy, how to make sure that your senior leaders are walking the talk and really doing it themselves, which we know from some HR people, they struggle to get to be reality. Emphasis, can software ever humanize the people side of performance management? And finally, conflict, can performance management software ever actually get in the way? And if so, how to avoid that? So that's what we're going to be talking through. So without further ado, I will lead us into the first question, which is about catalysts. So what would lead a company to think, I've got a process probably, and now I think I need to be considering putting this online? What kind of what are the sort of factors that an organisation might be seeing that means that they probably think it's time for software? Hedda, are you happy to take this one first?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not sitting here receiving loads of requests for software, so I'm interested in what you see at the point at which people come to you. But what we see is essentially sort of two core drivers for why people think they need software. One is a very powerful driver and the other one's a pretty unhappy driver. So the powerful driver is very much that they've got a process in place that's kind of working, but the administration of it is now clunky. It might have been run off Excel spreadsheets. I mean, I did work with one major investment banking company that ran a 900 people appraisal system off a spreadsheet. And, you know, that is a nightmare for somebody to do. And of course, if you're doing that, then using software is obviously the next stage to manage it, but also to get you data so that you can analyze the data and use the content. So there's clearly a positive reason there. Unfortunately, there's also a negative reason that drives people to think they need software, and that is when they think software will fix the problems that they have with performance management. If they're not managing performance well, as managers, as leaders, as an organization, putting in a piece of software, in reality, in my experience, is unlikely really to change that. It could if they opted to completely rethink what they were doing at the time. But if they think just putting in a piece of software will then solve the reasons why people don't manage performance, then they're going to be disappointed. But undoubtedly, that does lead organizations to think that software is the solution. So I guess those are my two takes on the catalysts.
Yeah, so just to pick up on the first one about the administration, yes, it can become an absolute nightmare. And so we do very often get people calling just saying, we can't possibly go through this again. I can't face it. Please, can we get something up and running that's going to ease the administrative burden, not just for me sitting in HR, perhaps, where for some people it takes weeks of the year to manage, but for managers and employees who feel like, you know, I just don't want to scrabble around to try and find those Word documents and things like that. So yes, a lot of the catalyst is around that. On the second one, you know, questioning whether bringing in a system is going to just automatically make everything brilliant, when actually the process that's been designed is fundamentally broken. I think that's a really interesting point. That happens a lot. It's something that we come across a lot. So we'll often start off talking about the administration. Someone say, look, it's just too much work. And then when we dig in a little bit more, we'll find out, well, actually, the feedback from managers is this takes this whole section of a form we have to fill out is irrelevant, and or people just aren't having these conversations at all, and they don't feel like that's the culture to do that, or they don't feel entitled or enabled to do that. And so we often end up having those sorts of discussions with our clients, which is why we put a huge emphasis on the customer success side of the business. So it's more than just software. And in fact, in some cases, we would recommend that a client goes to talk to someone like you, Hedda, to go and make sure that everything is all, that everyone is on board and understands what actually those conversations should be like before trying to support and automate that process. So yes, that is a really important point. And some of the other catalysts or the sort of triggers, I would say, could be something like an employee engagement survey, where they'll find, let's imagine a large organization of 10,000 people. You find that the graduate fast track program that runs for 2 years, that after 2 years actually find, huge amounts of churn at that level. And the survey tells you, well, actually, it's because I'm young, I'm ambitious, I'm not having the kind of, I can't see the career path for me here. There's dead wood, I can't get ahead. within this organization, then that obviously that survey might then lend itself to some consultancy or other work that you might do, perhaps, Hedda. Or for us, it would mean, okay, well, let's make sure that for that stratum of the organization, let's make sure that they are having regular career conversations that are automated or structured with our system. So the system, we believe the system can help to trigger the right sorts of conversations happening at the right time for the right people. So yeah, often a survey might be a catalyst.
I think that's a really interesting point, Roly. And I guess the other thing that organizations might be aiming at, especially once they've kind of crept over, say, the 100, 150 employee mark, is trying to create a consistency of experience for the workforce. Now, obviously, every manager is going to do it in their own way. But I think a well thought out process does at least support managers in having a consistency of what's happening, and enables all colleagues really to kind of have a basic understanding of this is what my performance conversations should be like, whatever that might be with the system. And undoubtedly a system kind of makes that easier, so you're not, as you say, scrabbling around for word templates and documents going, what am I supposed to do here, what am I supposed to do there? So I think that is also wanting something more consistent is a good driver.
Yep.
I think before we move on just to the next question, just an observation I'd make, and I think it picks up on both of your themes, is often performance management is actually culture change and change management in reality as well. Because as you said, Hedda, if an organization simply thinks that by putting software in, they're going to solve some fundamental issues with going on about performance, that's naive. And so we do tend to, as Roly said, get involved in conversations about what else goes alongside the software. What do you need to be thinking about the communications around this? Do you need to be thinking about the program management of it? How is it going to touch the most dispersed members of your team, the most, the tricky to reach people who are maybe aren't sitting at their PC every day? So it's often about all the other areas of culture change that go on outside the specifics of the performance management process. Okay, let's move to the next question, which is drivers. So say an organization has decided, okay, for all those reasons we've just covered, it's time for software. Roly, what would be the kind of factors that would make them, that they might want to consider as to whether they want an all singing or dancing HR information system that does everything, or a more point solution like Appraisd, for instance?
Sure. Okay. There are lots of factors. I think there are obviously some the kind of general factors that everyone should consider, which is this a good company to work with? Do you get the impression that the people working there are passionate about this, and that they're going to be they're going to be making decisions on your behalf in some cases? So they'll be saying, well, I think you've told us this about your organization, and therefore I'm going to recommend these features and the way this is enabled and the way you implement it. And you've got to feel as a buyer that those people are really knowledgeable. They're not just interested in the buttons and bells and whistles of the software, but they're genuinely curious about your organization and the challenge that you have. So that really speaks to having a strong customer success team. They're able to talk on a strategic level. So if I was buying, I would be asking that customer success, I'd be putting out questions to test them, maybe say, look, this is the challenge, this is the feedback I've had from the CEO or the leadership board. They want people to be more aligned. How would you recommend that we do that? Rather than, does it do X? I think it's really important nowadays with this kind of software, and this is where you move way beyond the all-in-one HRIS, which is really just a set of features, to something that is a point solution where it's you get that kind of level of that more strategic support as well. I think what it inevitably means, though, is that your strategic ambitions and your challenges as a customer will be different to many other organizations, and it depends on where you are in the growth of the company, what sort of work it is that people do. Is it very sales, or is it manufacturing, or is it creative industries? Are people paid by, do they bill by the 6-minute interval, or is it project work? And all of those things will change the way the performance management system works and the kind of data that you want people to be considering during those performance discussions. So having a very flexible and customizable system, I think, is just, it's just essential, really. And I think people can get stuck with a sort of an add-on module that sort of appears like it will do the job. And yes, there's a form that people can type into and it will send reminders, but actually, is it really creating the perfect environment for each of those discussions that are happening across your organizations? Not necessarily. So hence, that's hence the birth of Appraisd, really.
I think that's very interesting, Roly. The sort of talking to clients, I guess that they're buffeted, aren't they, between, in my experience, a lot of HR teams are the last in the line to get investment in their software. So it's a real struggle to even get permission to invest. And there's always a pressure, it seems to me, from procurement and from IT departments to buy one system that will do everything you need and not risk plugging different systems in, even though the kind of modern approach to APIs, and I don't understand more than that sentence, but I do understand that the sentence around APIs enables you to plug point solutions into an overall HRIS. I think it's quite demanding for some of the HR professionals to stand up to, the powers that be in the organization. And then, as you rightly also point out, it's easy to be seduced by bells and whistles. And and we all only have to look at our phone to think how many features on our phone do we not use? 90% of them probably. So I think the decision making is really tough. And I would urge anybody sitting out there thinking I've got to go into this decision making process is to work out what are you wanting to see different when your performance management system, whatever it is working perfectly, whatever you might choose, and really test those ideas and pick the top 2 or 3 ideas and hang on to those really strongly and find something that will deliver against that. And if some of the other things that you think are nice to have aren't there, I would actually let them go, because otherwise you're going to end up, I would say, with a system that's pretty average at everything and isn't very good at the one thing you need it to be good at. They've all started from somewhere, haven't they? So if you look at the big multiple systems, some of them started as learning management systems and added on performance. Some of them started as performance management and added on talent. Some started as talent and added on. And I think they all actually betray where they started from. And so if they haven't started from where it's important for you, I think that would, for me, be a big red flag around a system. So if I was looking for something that really needed to influence performance management in a particular way, I would focus on that above all else, would be my general, my take, given the struggles that I see HR people have.
Absolutely. That's a really, really good point. And you're right. Like I said at the beginning, with the catalyst, it might start with a trigger, which is a new chief executive of a 1,000 person company, whatever, who says, I don't feel like if I say what the company strategy is, I want to be certain that everybody in the company knows it and is thinking about it when they go back to their desk or work from home, and they feel they're a bit disconnected from me. I can't see them, and I want to know that everybody is aligned with what we agreed as the board direction. And also I want to be able to change my mind in 3 months' time, and because markets change, whatever, and I want everybody to know that we've now shifted direction and adjust accordingly. And so that's just one example, I think, of the really valuable thing that you want to go and find the system that will support that. rather than, like you say, you might end up with a big kind of divergent conversation talking about, oh, well, it can do this, 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 and this, and this, and it can replace that system, it can do that. You can get in a bit of a muddle, but yeah, if you hold on to those one or two key things, then I think that makes the decision-making process easier.
One point I'd add in as well is, I think it's HR people need to also consider who is it for, because often they may be seduced, as you say, by the bells and whistles because it promises them all the data and the information that they want to be able to get their hands on, that the COO is demanding from them. But for employees, in order to get the adoption that is the holy grail of performance management, particularly as it moves to a more continuous process, employees have to be able to use something that really works for them, and they don't really. It's not about the data for them. It's about them being able to use something that is user friendly, that keeps them up to date with their objectives, that are fluid and moving and having conversations whenever they want them, etc., etc. So I think again, that's maybe another thing to get to have a think about. Okay, let's move on to our next question, which is an interesting one, considering you both potentially represent a different side of the argument. So say a client has got a limited budget. What would you both suggest that they should invest it in? Should they invest it in the soft skills side, the people training for managers and employees, for instance, or on the software? So Hedda, do you want to start?
Okay. So I guess I think if you've got to choose between one or the other, I would invest in management development every time, because in the end, the managers have to have those conversations and they have to lead them and they have to be confident and they have to make them work. And no amount of software is going to really change that. One would hope it's not an either or, and I certainly would hope that you wouldn't be investing in training in order to how to use the software. But I think engaging the workforce with what it really means to manage performance, which is all about how can I do my best work every day. That's fundamentally what it's about, is what is it that I need to know in order that I can do my best work, and what does my manager need to give me? I always say they need to harness the time, the talent, and the energy of the people who work for them, and that's a series of soft skills. So if given a choice, I would put soft skills, even if you're running 900 people off a spreadsheet. I would still, if you were having to choose the management skills. But hey, Roly, you might have a slightly different view.
So first of all, I think there's return on investment in both. So if you've got the cash, invest in both, because you'll get a return from both, and it shouldn't be an either or question. Hopefully, I also like to think that with software we can do things like encourage certain behaviors and habits. We can prompt people to do things they might not otherwise do. We can prompt people to ask questions they might not otherwise ask, and we can subtly shape and alter the habits of managers and employees that we think over time will lead to a culture shift. However, when we usually implement Appraisd, we think of it as supporting and enlarging the soft skills training that they're getting. So you go on your training course, you get the opportunity, for example, if you do it with Hedda, to do the forum theatre interactive stuff, which is really illuminating, and you get the chance to try things out that you might not get to try out in a real life scenario. And those things are fantastic. And what I would hope to do with Appraisd is then to be able to ensure that training lasts a really long time and is supported and reinforced through the software. In fact, funny enough, Appraisd actually span out of a consulting organization that did performance management training. And the aim of it was we did fantastic training, but we then wanted to have something that would stay in place after the trainers left, that would then support what was being done and kind of remind people of those messages.
That's very interesting, Roly. And your ROI point is very interesting, because my instincts is that, you know, if you got an ROI of X on your soft skills and an ROI of Y on your software, if you did both, you wouldn't get X plus Y. You'd probably get a multiple of X plus Y, that they would reinforce each other and quite significantly improve the overall ROI. So yeah, find some way to invest in both.
That wasn't too bad. We could have had a big row there.
Yeah. There's no guns being fought that badly on this webinar. Cool, excellent. All right, let's turn to interesting question. So sometimes employees and managers feel quite understandably concerned about the use of software and the fact that, you know, whereas a conversation disappears into the ether, a live conversation, obviously the whole point is that there is a repository of that information if they're using software. So how to sort of handle, I suppose, the upsides of the fact that there's a track with whilst, you know, managing some of those concerns about confidentiality or maybe privacy issues, for instance, with underperformance or well-being type issues. So you can imagine the kind of that some people are concerned about that. Who wants to have a view on that first?
I'm happy to kick off with that. I mean, especially this does touch the underperformance topic, and it's a conversation that we have with people all the time, and I'm sure pretty much everybody listening will have faced at some point the challenge of being told by a manager that so-and-so is really no good, and they really, you know, we have to get rid of them. They have to be sacked because they're just not good enough in whatever way, or their behavior is not appropriate. And HR looks back through whatever records there are from their performance appraisals and finds that they've been rated as wonderful over and over and over again. And so they can't say it's a performance issue, because nobody's ever said it was a performance issue, even if it was all along. And I'm sure we've all met that problem. I think that problem arises from two core roots. One is undoubtedly managers find it difficult to have those conversations. It's hard to say what's wrong, especially when you're not really sure what to do to put it right. So, for example, we might say easily, you know, it's a capability issue. Now, it might be a capability issue if capability was very clear cut. So do you know how to do pivot tables on Excel spreadsheets, or don't you? You know, that's a clear cut piece of capability, and either you can do it or you can't. And if you refuse to learn, that would clearly be a capability, poor performance problem. But how do I say you're not a very good team leader? I mean, you know, something that is much more subjective as to what makes a good team leader. And it's not perhaps that you're bullying people. You're not doing anything obviously wrong. It's just that you're just not leading your team very well. And a manager might find it very difficult to phrase that, and very hard to respond to a challenge to that. So they tend not to write such comments and to struggle with having that conversation. And then if you then heap on top of that their concern about, I'm not very sure quite how to say all of this, and I absolutely don't want to write it in this system, because if I'm challenged and I'm proved somehow to have not understood what team leadership is, or it turns out this person's got a friend higher up the organization who can get it in for me, suddenly I've committed myself to something in writing that could come back to bite me. And I think there is a real challenge about enabling people to say, you know, this is not right in writing. And I can go on and talk about some possible routes forward. We might do that in a moment. But Roly, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that before we talk about how we might tackle it.
The only thing that comes to mind is ratings, and how difficult it is for managers to give ratings, and to give, you know, you might have a 5-point rating scale, and everybody knows that most people get 3 or 4, and so no matter that 2 is just before 3, that may feel like a big deal for a manager to give. And so I do pity the managers who need to do that, and I think when the research was done around what is it about the old-fashioned appraisals that managers find so difficult and time-consuming, and often it's just hovering over those buttons and wondering which one I should do, because one is going to set off a reaction, a chain reaction that I'm going to have to back up and justify, and perhaps, you know, actually that's not really what I wanted to do. So that's my only other point. But I don't know if you were going to come on and talk about thinking, you know, being forward looking, and go on then.
So I'd say that the way in which we can help managers tackle that, and I will pick up on your ratings point in a minute, Roly, because I think that's a you know, we know lots of people listening are probably still stuck with ratings. So how do we deal with that? But in the way that I encourage people to, especially what they've got to write down and make formal comments about where they are concerned about performance, is to do it on a future focus. So it is much better, let's be really simple about this, to say, in future, Alex has agreed that they will arrive on time for work every day. Instead of writing down, Alex is always late. So, and then if we say, in future, Sam will develop team leadership skills, particularly working to understand, you know, why his or her team isn't performing in as well as other teams. So that you write something that asks them to think forward. And then when you have your next performance conversation with them, you can then go, all right, let's look at that. How have we moved on from where we were last time? And I think it's that thinking forward and asking people not to admit that what's gone on in the past has been bad, but to ask them clearly to think forward. Now, I would just put a caveat around that. This is where we're talking about underperformance. If we're actually talking about something that I would call real poor performance, like bad behavior, bullying, or so, that shouldn't even have got as far as a performance review. You know, we should have dealt with that somewhere else. So if you are sitting here thinking, I've got to write, you know, this is a sackable offence in the performance review, it's like you're not having a performance conversation here. You are having, you know, a much more formal conversation, and you need to think differently about that. And you might indeed need HR support. Absolutely, these systems are not for recording that kind of behaviour. They're here to help people understand where they're off track and to get them thinking how to get on track, I'd say, is how I would think about it, really. I don't know where else you might go with that.
No, that's exactly it. It's the little and often, the setting expectations, looking ahead rather than, you know, in hindsight, is really just makes it so much easier. It makes it much easier for managers to be much more objective about things, and, you know, they're like little goals. Or things that you would like to see from that person that are mutually agreed. They're easily kind of swallowable in day-to-day working life, and you know, gives also, you know, fundamentally gives that employee the best chance of achieving what you would like them to achieve. You know, it's really unfair to let someone just carry on for 6 months the way they are and then tell them, you know, that you're not happy with it.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's absolutely right. And I think we do need to remember that, you know, it's a very rare person who gets up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to do a really bad job today. I'm really going to go and do a terrible job, right? That isn't how the vast majority of the workforce gets out of bed in the morning. They get out of bed on the whole hoping that they can have a reasonably good day. And some of them might feel more motivated than others, but we don't choose to go and have bad days at work. And I think, as you say, leaving it for too long creates those bad days at work. And the more we have little and often conversations, and the more your systems can approach, support little and often conversations, the better, really.
And I think the kind of stuff that software can help with is having prompts in the check-in to say, are there any issues that we need to talk about? Is there anything going off track, little off track, you know, kind of just veering off the path rather than dramatically off the path, and capturing stuff early and trying to put that in, you know, to correct stuff really early. Because as you said, Hedda, it's the implications of, you know, no one wants to do that, but the team finds it really frustrating when underperformance isn't being managed. So, you know, for a manager to not tackle it it might feel scary, but it's like, well, the implications later on are going to be way worse.
Yeah.
So just kind of get a bit of perspective and maybe a bit of courage to tackle it. Okay, let's move, because we've got a few questions coming in, which is great. So at least one or two of them we're going to cover in the next couple of questions. So I'm going to speed you up now. A really, really interesting one, senior advocacy. So I think we've all recognized the issue that HR helps design a great process backed up with fabulous software, and managers and employees are busy, hopefully, using it in a continuous way. But actually, the people who are quite tricky to get involved in this can sometimes be the very most senior leaders. So what would we say about encouraging them to actually walk the talk and do performance management themselves? Hedda, have you got any quick tips on that?
I have, because this is where we start with all our clients. Even if we're just going in to just do a small amount of management training, but certainly if we're going in to do a bigger project, is that if we're going in to do a design process, I now won't agree to do a project unless we engage with the CEO, or if it's a global organization, obviously the local CEO of whatever area we are, and the senior leadership team. Because if they think that performance management is about having a few people having a few conversations a year and it's not really very important and it's a minor issue, there is frankly no point in the organization spending the money on what they're planning to do. So I will go in and I will ask senior leaders very clearly to say to me, if performance management was working perfectly in their organization, whatever that process happened to look like, what would be different for them? And that 99 times out of 100 results in a long pause and the chief exec saying, that's a good question. And then we work through, and I structure process, I work through working out what is it that the senior leadership team want out of performance management. What performance are they not getting? What is the performance gap in the organization that they want closing? Is it a behavioral gap? Is it an alignment gap? Is it an energy and a drive? What are the problems that performance management is there to address? And once we've got that, then we'll work with a HR team and probably a cross-functional team to think about how do we design a performance management process that will deliver that outcome. And then, of course, the senior leaders want it because it's what they wanted. And so then you don't have the struggle for advocacy, because then you have leaders going, no, we ordered this because I wanted increased alignment. So I'm expecting to see increased alignment here. So why isn't everybody using this tool or using this platform or engaging in this training or whatever it is to deliver the increased alignment that effectively made me sign off on the investment? So for me, the question is I shouldn't be encouraging them to walk the talk. We should have gotten to a point where they are desperate to walk the talk because this is what they really want.
Absolutely love it. So that's going to be my bullet point here is the process, the system, whatever it is, needs to be meaningful to senior leaders. It needs to have purpose. It should be seen as a critical business function. It's not a thing that we have to do for compliance or something like that. Booking your holidays is not a business critical function, but having people aligned, performing to their best, getting on well with their manager, getting the feedback and progression they need, one of those will be seen by the senior leadership team as absolutely fundamental to the success of the organization. And this process should fall neatly out of those discussions. So absolutely with you on that, Hedda. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was going to say is, what about where we're talking about maybe sort of middle managers who are not they're not sitting on the board talking about the drive and direction of the company, but they're not just on the receiving end. They need to they may be managing small teams of people. I don't know what you would say.
So middle managers have it, they have it really tough in the business. I think the larger the business, the harder it is on the middle managers, because they get squeezed from both sides. So with those people, I think first of all, you have to make it really simple. So, there are systems where there's loads and loads of approvals, and grandparent signs off, and cross matrix signing off, and all of that kind of complexity. I would rip all of that out totally, and encourage middle managers again to think, what is the one thing that I really, really need to know about performance in the multiple teams that are below me, and show them, support them on how they can use your software to get access to that one thing. So maybe they want to know where the up and coming talent is. Maybe they want to know, where the strengths are in terms of technical capabilities, maybe they want to know which teams are really delivering on results and which aren't, whatever it is. And then I would really support them in using some of the behind the scenes tools that are available to help them access the knowledge that they want, because if they then see the knowledge they want, they will then get frustrated where there are gaps in the data, and then they will be going out and saying to people, just a minute, I don't know what's happening in that, in the office in Cornwall or whatever. Not that I'm suggesting the Cornish office is always, but I need to know what you're doing. So I think for middle managers, it's really about showing them the value they can get out from behind the scenes on it, as well as obviously the importance of them having their own conversations. And they need to remember that if they don't have good conversations with their managers, then the people who report to them, then those people won't role model that going down the organization. So I think that's where I would go. But I don't pretend to say that a middle manager has an easy life, because they don't.
An interesting question, which is, can software can it be counterintuitive? Can putting in a system actually make something more human, humanize the process and allow for individualization? Or is it, but putting in a system always going to be, making something formulaic? So Roly, what's your view on this?
I think it's a really good question. We certainly don't want to dehumanize the relationship between manager and employee. I think what we're trying to do is, we might be trying to introduce objectivity. So that means using data or perhaps making it easier for people to set expectations in a really clear, mutually agreed way, so that we don't have that problem we talked about earlier, where you're coming back and say, well, in my opinion, you didn't do this, and that's what I wanted all along, and you should have just known that. So ideally, what we're getting towards with using the software is a place where people can be clear on what's expected of them, and that they can prepare in advance. They can think about things clearly. They've got plenty of time to do that, and they can see trends and think progress that they've made over time. And that should hopefully allow a very, very human relationship between the employee and the manager. I think one thing to note is that we're not asking for managers and employees to be best friends. That's going to be difficult if you're charged with setting expectations that perhaps that person doesn't particularly want to achieve, or anything like that. So we're not trying to make that kind of relationship, but we are hoping that managers and employees really work together in a human way to get the best from each other, and that managers can empathize with the individual and see what are the things that are really going to motivate this person, that perhaps who's just joined my team. I know very little about them. I know that I can see their track record at the organization perhaps, but someone who I need to get to know quite quickly and understand what their motivations and drivers are, so that I can help them to do their best.
I think all of that's really interesting. I think the other aspect where you can use software well is, because it gives you data, you can use it to perhaps track your ED and I data. And so that if people are saying, you know, no women ever get promoted around here, right, you might actually have some data that shows, well, actually, that's not true. Or if they say there's no opportunity for anybody in the Manchester office, all the promotions only ever go to London, do you know, you might also be able to show that those aren't true. You will also be able to see, you know, are managers treating some kinds of people very differently to how they're treating others at a macro level. So ironically, that is using data to discover if people are being treated individually, ironically, rather than being treated as a group, whether consciously or not consciously. And I think that obviously is very helpful to organizations in today's world, especially where they can't see what's going on all the time, but to get some data to help them analyze that process.
I also think the best systems are enable a kind of transparency that makes it all feel much more human. So for instance, you know, if feedback is a feature of a performance management process, and an employee has the opportunity to ask for feedback from their peers, from their colleagues in other offices, in not just their manager, for instance, or even really brave to give upward feedback or to request feedback from a much more senior person, and that's an easy process, they can, you know, really understand, get much more rich picture about themselves and how they're viewed and where people see their strengths as well as their development areas. And it's just, you know, that's using the tool, I guess, to be just a more individual experience, because a lot of organizations still are very formulaic about that kind of stuff. They say, we're coming up to the annual appraisal, so now dictate, you know, say you're 6 people you're going to ask for feedback from, and it's once a year, and it's kind of, that's not very human. And everyone dreads it, because it's kind of like, oh God, it's that time of year when I'm going to get 16 different requests come into my email. But if it's much more fluid, because the system is there throughout, I think that can be a much more sort of human and individual experience. A question, and we've just got a few minutes left, that came up in the chat was, can a system ever be a disaster? Can putting in a system ever be a problem? And it's the same sort of area as our last one that I had said we were going to cover, which was, can performance management software ever be actually damaging? So which of you would like to answer this one? Have you ever seen an example of where it goes wrong by putting in some software?
Hedda, why don't you start?
Okay, and I think it links. Darren Mitchell's put a question up around what comes first, developing a process or choosing a software tool. And I think my answer is in that process. If you choose a software tool first, you might well make a mistake and choose something that doesn't do what your organization really needs it to do. And then everyone will hate it, and then you will not be popular. So I think it is, and I'm assuming that any tool you buy functions and is fit for purpose for what it does. Let's put that, and let's make it that kind of basic assumption. But it's really important that you have a tool that will help you deliver what you want to deliver. And buying a tool when you don't really know what you want to deliver can be a disaster. And I have seen that kind of disaster, as I've seen the disaster that we talked about at the beginning, where people are buying the tool in the hopes that it will somehow miraculously make everybody have great conversations, when of course it won't miraculously do that. So expecting it to fix a problem that it can't fix will bring a problem on your head. So I would really urge anybody listening, make sure that you understand what you're trying to achieve with your software before you choose it. And then, yes, maybe certainly around a process, you might then have to slightly flex how your process works in order to work with the tool that will deliver the result you really, really want. But mostly you should think first about what I want out, and then think about a tool. And the process is a kind of minor part in that. Is the outcome that really matters.
Yeah, I quite agree. So can it ever be, have I ever seen it be damaging? I'm not sure about that, but I feel like we probably had conversations at the very early conversation with customers where they've had a poor experience in the past, and they're looking to to do something completely different. So we do, I'm aware of it. But yes, I think that's probably why Appraisd and probably some of the other systems as well, that the other companies have developed customer success teams who are able to talk a bit more strategically about the process and what they want out of it, or bring in other resources or consultancy if necessary to do that. And we love it when an organization comes to us and says, well, we've just spent 3 months sitting, in a dark room, working out what is the perfect thing for us. And now we're coming out to market to see who can support it. And that always works really well for us. Having said that, we often work with small companies who say, look, we just don't really know. And so we will have a bit of we'll have to take a bit of a step back, and we'll ask them about what is it that you're really trying to achieve, and why did you call us at all? What is it that you're hoping for? What would great performance management look like in your organization? How would it manifest itself? And then we'll make recommendations around it. So it's very important that people have got a process that has been thoughtfully designed and is going to achieve those goals, and not just something off the shelf that they think, well, we better have something, so let's just do this.
To sort of meld this with a question from Emily Burks about, can a performance management software ever help me train managers to get better at performance management, and sort of bring these two together? What I have seen, and it's not that performance management software can ever be a disaster, but sometimes it can be confusing unless it's trained properly and communicated it well. Because I was once advising I was implementing performance management software. It wasn't Appraisd at an insurance company. And I had this fascinating conversation with a middle manager who said, now that we have implemented performance management software, I assume I'm no longer at liberty to have performance conversations with my people, because I have to do all of that online. I have to have the discussion online rather than face to face. And it was very surprising to me that anyone would really understand that was what he was no longer able to do. But I guess he hadn't really understood that it continues to be a human interaction. Performance management, people management is a human thing, but the software is there to track and be a repository of those discussions, and it doesn't replace the discussion between a manager and their employee. But it was eye-opening to me, because I just thought, how could you have thought that was the point of the software, to stop you talking? Yeah. But it can, yeah. So I think if we probably wrap it up there, unless anyone has a burning last question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lovely webinaring with you. Is that is that a phrase? Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you next time. Take care.